one, the roles are defined in a tab on the staff form. So again, you saw earlier how from the role you can assign a staff member, or from the staff member you can assign different roles. And this particular individual has a number of different roles that are assigned to them. Also, this concept and the ability to add new roles, it allows you as an organization to define additional roles if you want and additional capabilities. So that's nice. Now, how are these roles enforced within the client-side business rules? Because again, that is one of the primary reasons that this was done, was to improve the performance of the application. And so let's look here under business rules, under our client-side business rules, and let's take a look at one of these role client-side business rules. So if we look at support requests, here's our support request form, and here we're seeing all of the client-side business rules. The ones that pertain to roles are clearly indicated as such. So let's just look at this first one. We'll edit this. And so this particular rule is limiting who has the ability to set the status to closed and closed mail. Whereas here, it's actually defined in this particular condition. So let's add a condition so you can see how roles can be applied to these client-side business rules. First of all, our expression 1, we would typically use a transactional record data or a symbolic value. If we look under miscellaneous, we now have new functionality here, and that is the role option. So if we select the role, we can choose what role we want to grant this ability to do that. So as an example, we might want to add this to the specialist, which is something that's commonly done. So if we select that, there's our first expression, and then simply equals, and then 1 or 0. So a 0 being the role that indicating that is allowed. So at this point, we would just use our expression builder to use a 0. Okay, so again, they've changed the functionality within client-side business rules to allow for that functionality. All right, some other things to take a look at. As I mentioned, the user interface updates have been made. If we go back here to our PowerPoint, go back to presentation, let's look at some of the other things that were introduced. So this first item on this particular slide is not all that exciting, but the About box, in terms of where you can see what version of Service Desk Express you're on, that has been updated to also include what version of the alignability process model that you're on. Okay. Again, nothing too exciting there, but it is a modification that was made. The miscellaneous changes, just some real subtle things that were done. Whiteboards are being renamed to broadcast. I expect that that's something that you'll see in the core application, and that's just to go along the lines of what BMC is doing with the out-of-the-box product. Added Google Map icon to the site form. So when you're looking at a site, you can actually click an icon, and it'll take you to Google and show you the site on a map, and all the capabilities that you have with Google there. In addition to that, we've added the remote desktop control icon to the toolbar on the CI form, so allowing you to launch remote desktop control from the CI. And this could vary depending upon what type of remote control tool that you might be using. In terms of countries, I don't know how many of you might, this might affect, but it is important to note if you service multiple countries and have multiple countries in your implementation of alignability, but those countries the list of countries have been updated to meet the ISO standards, so there's a change from an Alpha 2 to Alpha 3 there. So let's real quickly just look at some of these within the application so that you have a feel for these modifications. So let's jump back over to the other screen. So if we go to, for example, our site form here, this is our headquarters in Stamford, US at 183 Harbor Drive. Well, if we click on our Google icon, that launches Google, and sure enough, there's the address. So this is, I think, probably really useful for organizations that are providing external support to external customers, things of that nature, and you've got individuals that are having to go to these different sites. That could be a useful tool. As I mentioned also on the configuration item form, a new button was added to allow us to remote into a machine. So if we look, for example, at a workstation, we have our remote access, and that is not configured for this particular implementation, but that's new functionality that was added as well. Okay, as I mentioned, the whiteboards were renamed as broadcast, but from a functionality standpoint, all of that still remains the same. So moving on, in terms of Service Pack 1, so some of you may have seen SDE 10.1. Service Pack 1 was recently released, and some of the new things that were improved upon here were, one, the performance improvements, as well as the loading of details. So these are really all performance oriented. Nothing that you'll see from a functionality standpoint, an improvement in functionality, other than it should perform much better. We now allow you to apply filters to the tree view. So that is one of the other things that was introduced in APM 10.1, was the services now are viewed in a tree, and we can filter those out as needed. Client-side business rules, the format actions were extended to static text controls, so improvement there in terms of how you construct your client-side business rules. And for those of you that might be using BOMGAR, we now support the latest versions of that. Also, the client services or the self-service interface, we have some more versions of Firefox and Safari that we support, and also mobility support. So let's talk about these in a little bit more detail. Again, in terms of the performance improvements, the IIS setting changes, really we're just, BMC's taking advantage of some of the inherent functionality within IIS, enabling the compression and caching. So again, you should see a dramatic improvement there over a wide area network. Remove and reduce unnecessary cost to the server and database, just anything that BMC could do to improve the performance of the application. And also client-side filtering of math and database lookup calls. So as you know, with your alignability implementations, there's a number of client-side business rules in place with those implementations, and so these are all things that dramatically improved performance. On-demand loading of the detail sections. So when we talk about the detail sections, we're really talking about those tabs at the bottom. So again, improvements in terms of production there. And ultimately, it's just requiring fewer calls to the database, or especially unnecessary calls to the database when loading a form. All right, moving on. Applying filters to the tree view. So some of you may have tried applying the tree view to fields such as the services before, which you could easily do that, but you were unable to filter those. So now you have the ability to filter, for example, your service list. Maybe you only want to see business services and not your technical services, which again, allowing you to define those things were that those were new additions in 10.1. The client-side business rule format action extended, again, just allowing you to, in this case, for static text as bold using client-side business rules, allowed you to do that much more easily, which all of you know in alignability, fields will bold and unbold based upon the requirement at the time of that record in the process. And so these were things that made that development and modifications much easier to do there. Mobility support. There's Apple iPad, Apple iPhone, and the iTouch support now, and that is for your support request only. And it is my understanding that from BMC there's no additional cost for this, but understand that it is for the support request only, and in addition to that, it is not customizable. So if you need access to other modules or you want to customize the out-of-the-box interface, you'd need something such as the Magic Mobile product to do that. But BMC does now support connectivity through the Apple products, and you can download those from the App Store at Apple. Other things, as I mentioned, we now have the BOMGAR support that for the later versions of BOMGAR. So for those of you that might be using BOMGAR, that certainly allows you to upgrade with no problems with your BOMGAR implementations. And for the self-service and clients or self-service functionality, we now support new versions of Firefox and Safari. Okay, and there was also a number of patches and hot fixes that were rolled into the Service Pack 1 release as well. So really, we were holding off on just our Service Desk Express customers, whether they be APM or not. We were recommending that they really hold off until this first Service Pack 1, and now that that's out, we feel it's a much more stable product, and they addressed many of the major issues that we've found. Okay, so some additional notes in regards to upgrading your alignability implementations. One here is a support version matrix that you all should be aware of. So technically, your alignability process model versions 5.2 and lower are no longer supported. Now, when you get into 5.201 and above, so 10, 10.1, these are obviously all supported versions, and you can see the versions of Service Desk Express there are. What I will tell you is that in the past, many of you or many APM customers have simply updated their version of Service Desk Express without making any updates to the actual alignability implementation. Okay, so what that means is that any process changes, any improvements in terms of business rules, things of that nature, you're not really taking advantage of those. You've taken advantage of any new functionality that the Service Desk Express product introduced, but not to the alignability implementation. With this release explicitly, because there are so many changes not only to the processes, but to the application as well, explicitly when we talk about all of those client-side business rules that relate to roles and the improvements, performance improvements there. Really the only way that it's feasible to take advantage of that would be to implement the alignability 10.1 and then migrate your data to that. Because again, by simply just applying the Service Desk Express, latest version of Service Desk Express, that does not update the customizations that have been made to your alignability implementations.